Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another edition of EASports Talk. I am Ezra A. Skoboloff, and I'd like to give a quick apologies to all you Loyal 4 listeners because I was unable to do a podcast last week. Did a little move, so plenty of things going on in the life outside of sports. Though rest assured, I was able to watch my teams play even without my own cable for a little bit. But a lot of things happening in the last 2 weeks. But for the sake of relevancy, I'm going to talk more about what's happened most recently. And one of the first things has to do with our beloved Flyers, whose new season started just last week. So let's get into that. Crosby sucks. Sorry, got a little carried away. Can't wait till we play the Penguins, by the way. I'm sure the rest of you feel the same way. But obviously the big news coming out of Flyers camp this week was the firing of former head coach now, Peter Laviolette, and definitely surprised to most, certainly surprising to me. Of course, they had the slow start. I can't say that I completely agree with the firing, certainly in terms of when it happened. I understand it as a fan, and I certainly understand it as the GM of this team who's been making the moves the last few seasons that have come into question. So let's get into that a little bit more. And of course, I'm alluding to Paul Holmgren. And the question comes, one, is it too soon to fire Lavi? And whose fault is it really for the poor start to this season? And more importantly, because this has more to do with just losing 3 games in a row, is whose fault is it for last season? Give some fault, I guess, to Bettman and the NHL and NHLPA, I guess, for having a season that was shortened, played the lockout. And, you know, they might say if you're a younger team, you're probably better suited, or if you're an older team, you'll know how to handle it, so you're better suited. Really, you just don't know. Teams are going to deal with it or not deal with it, and I think it's more of a toss-up. And just if you happen to start off well, then you're probably going to have a better season. The Flyers didn't, of course. But the problem is, in a shortened season like that, you didn't really have any training camp. You didn't have any preseason games, if I recall correctly. Feel free to call me out if there were one or two. But you're testing line combinations in meaningful games. If you have a team of younger guys and some change going on, you need the preseason to work that out. You need to see who's going to make the team, who's not, who fits in with your team. You didn't really have that opportunity without a significant training camp and certainly preseason games. So I can't be that surprised that the Flyers started off slowly. The issue is they never really brought it on consistently at any point during the season, and that's why their season went so poorly. But the start to this season, obviously you're frustrated that you mustered 3 goals in 3 games, but there was some solid play in there just without finishing, and they played some good goalies, even with the victory last night, 2-1 over the Florida Panthers. You started off fairly quickly and you got 2 goals, but that was it. So right now you're averaging 5 goals in 4 games, and do the math, and it comes out to not very good. But what you did like from the first game against the Maple Leafs was that they were attacking and being aggressive all game. The issue is that Bernier for the Leafs played an outstanding game and really won that game. You only gave up 2 goals and I believe an empty netter. That's a game that a typical NHL team with today's NHL and the amount of scoring that you should at least be competing and if you're going to lose a couple games where you lose 2-1 or 2-0, 3-1, that's going to happen. But for that to happen in the first few games was obviously troublesome. So, like I mentioned, they started off well in terms of offensive attack in the first period, maybe even period and a half against the Maple Leafs. The issue is that they weren't putting any in the back of the net. Part of that was missing the net on a lot of quality scoring chances, if you can consider them chances, considering there weren't legitimate registered shots on goal. But the problem is that when you can't capitalize and you have all that momentum, and they did score one goal late in the period, that the team that has been struggling and has clearly not been doing well in the game, and when the Flyers have all the momentum and you don't score, one, that's mentally a little tough to keep thinking, come on, keep at it, we'll get a goal at some point, especially when a goalie's coming up with big saves. But from the Maple Leafs standpoint, you say, hey, we haven't played well at all, and we're still in this game. And what always happens in hockey is you could have a quick little turnover and turns into a goal. And that's what happened, and the Leafs got two of them, and you wind up losing the game. And I just had that feeling that if we couldn't at least put a second goal in there at some point in the second period when we're still carrying the play, that we were going to wind up losing a game, and that's exactly what happened. Don't call me as prophetic as our Eagles announcer, Merrill Reese, calling the interception last week for against Eli Manning. I don't know if you get less props because it's Eli Manning, and that was like number 27 in 5 games rather, but I just had a bad feeling about that. And the other 2 games, obviously, there still wasn't any offense. And the goaltending, by and large, was pretty solid. I don't think you can blame that at all. And the defense, also, with the exception of some breakdowns, was solid. Obviously, you don't want those breakdowns, but those types of things can happen. So, I just knew that this was going to be a struggle after that first game, and having such good pressure and not being able to score, that it was going to start to be a mental thing. And like any sport, especially with hockey, confidence is huge. It's certainly individually, and it's definitely with the team. I think if you see Claude Giroux in the next couple of games starting to put in the puck in the net, the whole team is going to pick it up, and they're going to wind up having very few issues, certainly not of this nature, with their offense. But that brings me to the second, really the first 2 questions. Is it too soon to fire Lavi? In the season, it probably is, but I don't have that much of a problem with it. And not because Laviolette did anything of fault, but it was clear that the team just wasn't playing with fire. When they did have aggression, it certainly was fairly short-lived, and when something went wrong, it was the spelling of the end of the game, and that's not what you can't have. And I think the firing was more of a attention grab for the players more than Laviolette not doing well. And by the way, for those who I've heard saying that he wasn't that good of a coach anyway, and what he did was with a great goaltender carrying him, blah, 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 you don't know what you're talking about. The guy is a great coach, and he's respected around the league for a reason. So if you're still having those thoughts, just shut up, please, or keep them to yourself and take down notes about how you're an idiot, because that's really the reality. The guy's a great coach, and he's going to get work from somebody else shortly. You don't win a Stanley Cup without good goaltending, but you don't win a Stanley Cup without solid coaching. So let's just put an end to that right there. But whose fault we can put on last season and the poor start, I don't put on Laviolette. Obviously, he has some part in that. But, between Laviolette, Holmgren, and your captain, Claude Giroux, I think you got to put a lot of this on Paul Holmgren and some of the signings he made. I didn't really have, and I still don't have, a huge problem with trying to go out and bring in a starting goaltender in Brzgalov. And I was always one to support Brzgalov when a lot of people were trying to crap on him. But the reality is the guy played some solid hockey. What we don't like, obviously, is the fluky goals that come in, and for whatever reason, his personality, which, by the way, every guy is unique. Every goalie is weird. Let's be honest. Every goalie is crazy. The problem is that if you don't start off super, super well in Philly and you're the goaltender, certainly with any position, but definitely the goaltender, you're going to have a lot of people getting in your face about it. And when you have all those cameras in your face and you feel like you're playing fairly well, but you make one small mistake that's a little bit fluky, and they get on you, it's hard to live in the city. And I'm not excusing him because I still think he could have handled himself much better. But ever since the HBO thing, which really was just kind of funny, there was no reason I see no reason to try to crap on him for, being a, I don't know, cerebral guy about that thing. It's sort of ridiculous. But when you have a goalie play, I believe it was 30 games in a row, but we'll just go with roughly 30 games in a row in the NHL, he's going to break down. You just can't have that. And part of that was because we had no backup. So Paul Holmgren, please tell me how you sign Brian Boucher or Michael Leighton as your backup in the NHL. I don't care how much money you're going to give Brzgalov. You need to have a good backup. So it made no sense to me that you would have such poor backup goaltending for a guy that's playing 30 games in a row. Make a trade. Do something. You're not going to have a guy do well and be sharp and as intense as possible because he's going to get worn down both physically and mentally. And even if he's doing well, that's going to happen. But when you have a team that has shit defense and a team that's struggling, all those things, mentally, you're going to break down even more. And when you're broken down mentally, then your intensity and your physical play is going to drop. It just doesn't make any sense. And then after that, the guys that you have and the guys that you go after, let's say Brzgalov isn't that great of a signing. And in retrospect, it wasn't that good of a signing. But even so, it was a solid signing for the caliber of player I think you brought in. But for putting all that much money into a guy like that and putting no money into your backup makes no sense. For putting money into shit guys like Bruno Gervais and all these other players that really bring nothing to our defense and really are just new shit from another organization, while they're new names and you can be optimistic prior to, the reality is we know that if they weren't anything before, they weren't going to be anything here. The guys that we brought in that succeeded from other teams had potential and were solid guys that people just didn't know as much about and were overshadowed. Guys like Timonen and Coburn and Mazzaros, these were all guys that were solid players that were, as I mentioned, not spoken of that much because they were in cities where, hockey isn't as big, so the coverage isn't going to be on there and you're not going to know their names as well, or they have potential and it's just sort of untapped and they're in a system that isn't really helping them out. And that's what you got. But guys like Gervais and this year, Hal Gill, and these are, a different situation with him just being past his prime. But him and drawing a blank here on the other defenseman Andreas Lilja. I mean, these guys aren't bringing anything, but some of them age. What do we care about age? We can go out and get a young defenseman who can be groomed by the likes of Timonen. So these are the types of things that just frustrate me because, and again, I'm okay with letting him go because you got to spark the team. But at the same time, this is really an issue with Holmgren and in a minor issue too with the play of Giroux and sort of not the lack of intensity, but sort of, we've seen him we've seen Giroux pick up his game and pick up the team, like in the playoffs against Pittsburgh, to win that series and shut the door. And we just haven't seen that in the last year and 3 games. So we need to see more of that. But really, the issue is Paul Holmgren, and you see and you've heard, hopefully, that Ron Hextall has come back from LA, from the Kings, a cup winning team who's done well outside the organization. Back here now, assistant GM. His time is coming. If it's not during this season, I want it to be next season, because there are guys that probably need to be traded that are definitely trade bait, especially with Mazzaros and Coburn, guys that are solid. But now, ironically, we have a logjam at defense, and we need to play some of these younger guys, like who's a healthy scratch, Eric Gustafson, who needs to just be playing, and guys that are in the AHL, like Brandon Manning and some of these other players that deserve time and deserve the opportunity to play in the NHL, and that's going to happen through trades. And I'm not sure that I want Paul Holmgren being the guy to do that. I think I would much rather have Ron Hextall get his shot to do those things. So hopefully that happens, but we're not too sure. But definitely Craig Berube in his debut. Whether it's him directly, and I certainly think he has the passion, or just that spark I was talking about, getting the team to show some more intensity. That happened, and while the offense didn't convert too many goals, they converted enough. But really, star of the game was Steve Mason, and he's played so well. I wouldn't rush to call him the goaltending savior of Philly now, but certainly be impressed, because you should. But I at this point, and it's only 4 games, and I believe that's now 3 starts for him. I think the best situation as of these 4 games is for him to start the majority of them. Maybe it's 60-40, maybe it's more, depending on how the season goes. And having Ray Emery starting the other 40%, plus minus whatever it's going to be. It worked for Chicago last season. Obviously, he had 1 loss in 19 games, so 18-1. And I think he might be best suited as being that really, really solid backup who could be a starter for other teams, but might be best suited to start or to be the backup and start in that range of 20 games, or rather, I guess that was in a lockout season. So for a real season of 82 games, maybe 30, 25 some odd games, I think would be best suited for him. And you just can't ride one guy for 10, 15 games straight, let alone 30 like Briz did last season. And again, you could put some of the blame on Laviolette for running him that hard, but certainly, like I mentioned, Holmgren deserves some of the blame too for having less than a serviceable backup, and that's putting it nicely. So look for what happens there. I think you're gonna see Steve Mason play the next few games still, as long as he plays well, and then when there's a back-to-back, Ray Emery's going to be in there, and he's certainly going to get his shot. So definitely like what I saw out of the goaltending. As I mentioned before, it's just a matter of time before the offense gets going, because you have too much skill for it not to. It's just going to be a matter of, I think, Giroux putting a few in, the team just having a breakout game, and then the confidence is just going to build, and things are going to be all right. So I'm going to move now on to some fantasy football talk. Just one quick question, which is sub-questions in it that I wanted to address, and we'll do this more moving forward. So please give me your questions, and I'll answer them the best I can. But I had someone ask me about my outlook on Julio Jones, and also my outlook on Alshon Jeffrey, who could be a great replacement for you. What I've read is that Julio Jones might not be out for the season, but he's certainly out for a good majority, and we'll see how quickly he can come back if he does at all this season. But from a fantasy perspective, if you have Julio Jones, I don't really see a reason to keep him on your roster because he's just going to be holding space there. And I understand the mindset of holding out for him to play later. But the reality is, if he comes back, which would be in the playoffs of fantasy, in however your league does it, whether it's 13, 14, 15, he's not going to be back that soon. And if he is in the championship game of your league or maybe even the semifinals, he's not going to look like the old Julio Jones. And you might see him play a little bit better or just really start to play in week 16 or 17, and that just means that it's not really worth it to keep him on your roster. The other guy who could be a great replacement is Alshon Jeffrey, and I actually picked him up after his first good week where he had 20 points, had a touchdown, over 100 yards receiving, and I wanted to wait to see if he could back that up because there wasn't that much production in the first few games, but obviously he did that in a big way, almost 30 points in standard leagues. And I think that's a sign that this guy has arrived. And a lot of people believe him to be a true number one receiver. Obviously, he has to develop into that, but you're starting to see what's happening. And it's a similar thing in the ascension of Dez Bryant, where last year, the year before that, he was definitely a real solid fantasy play. You couldn't necessarily rely on him every single game to put up numbers like he is this season, but I think in the same way that Dez Bryant did those last couple years, you can definitely rely on Jeffrey, or at least take the chance of him being a flex. I personally would have played him as my starting second wide receiver. He could even be potentially, if you're that if you're without a really strong wide receiver, a 1, although I don't think he's necessarily a top 10, 12 wide receiver. I think he warrants that consideration, and like I mentioned, he's a great replacement for Julio Jones if you can get him or you can trade for him. And I actually used him for trade bait. So also consider that if he's on your team and now you have a surplus of wide receiver talent because he did so well and people will be looking to get him. And just as a third, in case you can't get Alshon Jeffrey, can't trade for him or pick him up, then I would say look out for Justin Blackmon. He was suspended, and I believe... no, I think he was just suspended, but he, who knows with that guy, maybe he's hurt a little bit. But he came back and he put 20 points up on himself, and even though his team is god-awful, Chad Henne was certainly much better than Blaine Gabbert, and you saw that last week, and, he put up a big play, which you could say as well, a big touchdown, that is, I believe, 67 yards or so. That could be looked at as, oh, well, he just had one big play. That's padding his stats for this week, and maybe that's not going to happen. But really, the thing is he's the type of guy that's a big play threat. And with him and Cecil Shorts on the other side, you have a solid wide receiver who's going to not let you strictly double cover Blackmon. So that's a solid pickup. Denarius Moore, now that he has semi-good quarterback playing for him in Terrell Pryor. I think he could be a third guy on that list that you could pick up. I picked him up to stash away. So these are guys that could help you replace Julio Jones. It's time for Birds of War. Ah, ah! All right, Eagles fans, how about that win this weekend? Let's give ourselves a round of applause. All right, good job, boys. We didn't lose to a team that is god-awful. And may I just say, after 2 weeks ago of giving you the stats of the Giants, that I am so proud that they have been able to play so consistently. Fuck you, Giants fans. Thank you, Eli Manning. Guy's awesome. Almost as awesome as Tony Romo, because as usual, you can trust him no matter how good he may play for the majority of the game to do something dumb to lose it. And that's what we'll come to expect of some of these guys. So I wasted, well, I didn't waste a lot of time, but I don't want to waste time this week talking more about the Giants because we know how bad they are. I've talked about that already. Nothing's changed. Status quo. But more importantly, I think we have another quarterback controversy in Philadelphia. Well, this is quarterback controversy number 8 in the last 3 or 4 years. What a surprise. But just like in the beginning of the season, preseason that is, and training camp, both of these guys showed that they can bring something to the table. We've seen what Vic has done. We've seen a very little bit of what Foles has done. But the reality is we need to move on from Michael Vick. I haven't liked him, as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, that I haven't liked him since week 2. He had a decent game in week 2, but the efficiency of the offense, the ability to score instead of rack up yards, it just hasn't been there. And I don't just think, I know that this has a lot to do with him because as much as we talk about Andy Reid and his inefficiencies, and he definitely has poor play calling and judgment in the red zone, I don't think that in Chip Kelly's career, and while again, say, Ezra, this is the NFL, not the college, whatever, people know how to score or they don't know how to score. And the issue is with this team is that you have a guy running the ball who, as many other people have mentioned, or rather running their offense, he's short. He doesn't necessarily make the best decisions. He doesn't necessarily know how to read the defenses as well as other guys. I won't say he can at all because that would just be ignorant to think he can't at all. So Vic haters, please just back off a little bit. But the issue is that he's not the efficient guy. And efficiency wins out, or that type of style, in the red zone. So, I really haven't seen any improvement. Certainly, you could make the case for regression even in Vic. But the reality is when Foles came in, he looked great, and he deserves to start this week. Even if Vic is healthy, and it looks like Vic isn't going to play. But like I said, even so, the way Foles was able to run the offense, he deserves to have that start. And I think you just need to see how the offense does in a game against a better defense, which Tampa Bay definitely has, and in a game that is from 0 to 60 as opposed to coming in without preparation against your quarterback. So if Foles plays really well and they win again, I don't think you can bench him for a healthy, quote-unquote, Mike Vick, as Chip Kelly has sort of alluded to. But, I would play him. And for those of you who have said that we need Mike Vick because our running game is going to take a hit, well, tell me this. What has happened with Adrian Peterson and whoever has been his quarterback, Ray Rice and Joe Flacco, Arian Foster and Matt Schaub, Maurice Jones-Drew and whoever the hell has been the quarterback over his career, and then Jamal Charles over his career. And while you might say, oh, Alex Smith's moving around a little bit this year, well, Charles put up 1,400 rushing yards and Matt Castle was his quarterback. So I just don't agree with you. So, on quickly, because we only have a little bit of time left to the Tampa Bay game. Honestly, it scares me a little bit, while they have not won a game and they have some issues in that locker room with their coach. They've lost close games. As I mentioned, they have a really good defense. And the key, I think, is to come out hot as the Eagles, because if you do, you're going to keep them from building any sort of confidence, any shred of hope that this team has. It could mean a tough game, and one the Eagles certainly could lose. So I think if we get a fast start, we're going to have a very good possibility of winning by touchdowns. If not, like I said, it could be a struggle. But as I mentioned, I look for the team to be much more efficient with Nick Foles. And while I wasn't able to spend a lot of time this week, we'll talk about it more in depth in our next podcast. So thanks for listening, and go Birds.